This video is presented for historical and educational purposes only. World Documentary Archives strongly condemns hate speech, violence, and all forms of extremism.
Colonel Wilbur Dockham served in Europe with the 108th Army Battalion under General George Patton. He filmed several of the battalion's military movements on his private home movie camera. In this clip, American soldiers cross an unknown body of water and land on an Italian beach, most likely in 1943, when southern Italy was liberated by the Allies. Colonel Dockham died in 1975 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Stephen Minovich, a native of Yonkers, New York, and a member of the 31st Tank Battalion, recorded this war destruction in a town in Germany in 1945. Minovich was involved in several campaigns in Europe. Here we see the German city of Stuttgart in ruins, filmed by Major Sidney Burr of New York City. Major Burr's job as part of the 8th Air Force was to analyze data from bombing missions over Germany. These shots of a destroyed train yard illustrate Stuttgart's strategic importance as a center of rail transportation. A sign in German reads, "Photography forbidden." Colonel Alexander Zabin filmed German prisoners of war who surrendered to American troops. Zabin was a physician with Patton's Third Army. He treated the wounded throughout the Allied campaigns in France, Belgium, Germany, and other countries. Discovery of the Western concentration camps shocked and appalled American troops who were unprepared for the conditions and the physical state of the men, women, and children they found. Nonetheless, they tried to help the sick and starving survivors. As part of the Air Force Motion Picture Unit, Arthur Mainzer, Norman Krasna, and other Hollywood cameramen documented the liberation of the camps on color film. Mainzer remembers, "Our orders were to film the atrocities. I also photographed over 100 children who were incarcerated in the camp." These are some of those child survivors, including 4-year-old Joseph Schleifstein. More than 21,000 prisoners of Buchenwald were discovered by the liberating forces of the American Third Army. Here, an American Army medic reacts emotionally to what he sees. Major Sidney Burr filmed the infamous Dachau death trains, American soldiers at the camp, and former prisoners in the first days after liberation. The so-called death trains were made up of nearly 40 rail cars containing the corpses of prisoners evacuated from Buchenwald. Here we view liberated prisoners from outside the barbed wire surrounding the camp. This 16mm film was donated only a few years ago and gives us unique views of the camp and the prisoners that complement the official Army footage of Dachau. For example, in the background of this scene, we see a brass band, which does not appear in any other known footage of Dachau. Newly liberated prisoners posed for the camera of Colonel Alexander Zabin, a physician who landed on the beach at Normandy the day after D-Day and spent the rest of the war tending to wounded American soldiers. Long shots show the flags of many nations representing the former inmates' countries of origin, as well as the American flag of their liberators. In the distance is a guard tower and the moat which surrounded the camp. This Kodachrome film of Dachau was taken by Colonel Wilbur Dockham. American soldiers inspect the camp. Here, German civilians are forced by American soldiers to bury Jews killed by the SS in the forest around Neuenberg. Stephen Minovich filmed this footage showing victims from the Nordhausen forced labor camp while he was serving in the American Army. Prisoners at Nordhausen worked in underground factories, deprived of daylight and fresh air, and enclosed in unstable tunnels. Here we see German civilians forced to transport the dead to their graves. Polish refugees in Germany take shelter in the ruins of a building. This scene, shot by Dr. Myron Green with his personal camera, shows the repatriation of displaced persons. Dr. Green served as a dentist with the U.S. Army from 1940 to 1945 and was present at the liberation of Dachau. The Allies returned more than 6 million refugees to their home countries in the immediate aftermath of World War II. American soldiers on the grounds of Buchenwald concentration camp. The liberators helped survivors into ambulances. Tony Brooke was a U.S. Army Signal Corps cameraman working in the film unit headed by famed Hollywood director George Stevens. In addition to the official 35mm black and white film stock issued by the Army, Stevens provided his crew with 16mm color film and small handheld cameras to enable them to capture as many of their experiences as possible. Gordon Dixon was in the 99th Chemical Mortar Battalion in Italy, France, and Germany. In a recorded testimony about this footage, he recalls that he and his fellow soldiers encountered these former prisoners on the road in Germany. An interpreter asks one man how long he was imprisoned, and he holds up his fingers to indicate that he was in a camp for 4 years. Approximately 11 million people were classified as displaced persons after the war, among them about 50,000 Jews who did not wish to return to their former homes. The conditions in many displaced persons camps were deplorable. Eventually, the Allies established Jewish DP camps, and Jews began to rebuild their religious, economic, and family lives. This footage of the Neu-Freimann Displaced Persons Camp shows Dwight D. Eisenhower touring the camp, which was located near Munich. Eisenhower's tour of this and other DP camps in fall 1945 was prompted by a strongly worded cable from President Truman instructing him to institute reforms that would improve living conditions of Jewish displaced persons in the American zone of occupation. The man who shot this footage was George Kaddish, an avid amateur photographer and Holocaust survivor who also documented life in the Kovno ghetto. Jack Soutine filmed daily life in the Neu-Freimann DP camp seen here. Soutine escaped from the Mir Castle, which served as a ghetto during the German occupation of Belarus. He lived in the woods and organized a small band of partisans. After the war, Soutine and his wife spent several years in Neu-Freimann, and their daughter Cecilia, who receives a kiss from an older child, was born in the camp. Willy Vogel was one of approximately 1,000 Jewish children liberated from Buchenwald by American troops in April 1945. Here, the children leave for France, where they received medical care, vocational training, and counseling, while relief workers searched for any living relatives. George Kaddish filmed the Landsberg Displaced Persons Camp, which housed many Jews from the Soviet Union and the former Baltic states. It was a hotbed of political and religious activity. Residents of Landsberg were active in rebuilding Jewish life after the Holocaust. Newspapers were published in several languages, and vocational schools helped prepare residents with skills to aid them in their new lives. The Organization for Rehabilitation Through Training, or ORT, provided Holocaust survivors with training in carpentry, metalworking, dressmaking, and other fields. Here, Landsberg inhabitants create artworks which tell of their experiences. Some of the many children who were born or raised in the displaced persons camp. Two boys read from a prayer book and receive religious instruction. The prolific George Kaddish also shot this film of patients at the St. Ottilien Hospital near Munich. St. Ottilien was a former monastery that during the war became a hospital that treated wounded German soldiers. Through the efforts of Dr. Zalman Grinberg, former director of the Kovno Ghetto Hospital, and American Army chaplain Rabbi Abraham Klausner, who was active in improving conditions for DPs, the monastery became a DP camp where former prisoners received medical treatment. Jack Soutine's daughter Cecilia receives a bath at Neu-Freimann. She was born in the camp. Ephraim Meyer Robinson's daughters, Faye and Alice, play in the snow at the Zeilsheim Displaced Persons Camp. The fur jacket worn by Faye is part of the museum's collection. Robinson and his wife fled Eastern Europe after the war and arrived at the DP camp in October 1945. Zeilsheim was the site of many Zionist protests against restrictive British immigration policy. Street and building complexes in the camp were named after towns and kibbutzim in Palestine. Displaced persons take their protest into the city of Frankfurt. American military police accompany marching protesters through the streets. The Central Committee of the Liberated Jews in the U.S. Zone of Germany aimed to formulate DP policy and coordinate activity in the areas of education, culture, religious affairs, clothing, nutrition, emigration, and information. Its main purpose was to draw public attention to the plight of Jewish survivors in DP camps and to put pressure on Britain to open Palestine to immigration. At this meeting of the Third Congress in 1948, Jewish displaced persons, both Orthodox and secular, are in attendance. An iconic symbol of Holocaust survivors, a graphic of a branch growing from a felled tree, appears above the stage featuring delegates and speakers. Most Jewish survivors eventually immigrated to the United States or Israel. American documentarian Julian Bryan filmed young displaced persons learning English outdoors. Bryan, who had filmed the start of World War II in Warsaw, returned to Europe after the war and worked for two relief organizations. He was tasked with capturing images of Europe rebuilding. Here, young refugees board a train in Bremen, Germany. Bryan's films were intended for an international audience and were often screened under the auspices of the U.S. Department of State. Julian Bryan also filmed the USS General Black, dubbed the Ship to Freedom by its passengers, which brought 813 European DPs from 11 nations to the United States under the provisions of the newly enacted Displaced Persons Act in October 1948. These were the first DPs allowed to enter the United States under the new quota. The ship's departure from Bremerhaven, Germany, was marked by speeches by military and civilian leaders and an army band concert. The ship landed in New York City. Sam Raffel, a native of Gombin, Poland, filmed this gathering of Gombin survivors in New York City. The proud new immigrants display an American flag. Joka, Franziska, and Otto Verdoner pose on the deck of the SS Gripsholm, bound for the United States. The children and their father Jarrett survived the Holocaust in hiding. Even the most commonplace home movie may help us and future generations understand the impact historical events have on ordinary